New Yorkers have dealt with notorious serial killers in the past, like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, bag murderer, Joel Rifkin, and the Last Call killer. But it was the New York Zodiac who attacked citizens based on their astrological sign. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Sal Bono, and this is New York Gritty.
The Zodiac killings were crimes that occurred in Northern California. It was a very complex set of crimes. It involved 5 deaths and 2 survivors. It was a very strange set of murders that involved letters to newspapers, and it also involved ciphers, which were messages hidden in cryptic codes, and it became the most notorious unsolved mystery in American history. The first crime occurred in December of 1968, and the final Zodiac killer attack occurred in October of 1969, so over about a 10-month period. I think what intrigued me about the San Francisco Zodiac killer case was that it remains unsolved to this day. It's just steep in mystique because the perpetrator sent out a lot of letters and the ciphers and was really taunting authorities about catch me if you can and sending out clues like that.
The New York Zodiac first got on the NYPD's radar in November 1989 after he sent a warning letter telling authorities he was going to kill someone. The letter, like those of the notorious Zodiac killer of Northern California, contained a circle with a cross in it.
In 1989, he sent a letter to the 75th precinct talking about the Zodiac as sort of coming out and to be aware of him. I think it was one of the detectives or one of the supervisors in the precinct decided to vouch for the letter. Even though other people in the precinct thought it was just a hoax, he luckily had decided that there was some merit to it.
The New York Zodiac first attacked in the spring of 1990. The victim was on his way home from his job washing dishes at a coffee shop. The Zodiac wore a ski mask and shot the man in the back.
That was the shooting of Mario Orozco.
Orozco's Zodiac sign was Scorpio. He survived the shooting. Exactly 21 days after the shooting of Orozco, the Zodiac found a Gemini in Jamaica, Queens. The man was shot in the head and in the side, but recovered. The shooter used what was known as a zip gun,
which is a homemade gun where you can fashion it at home. It had a barrel that didn't leave tracing marks on it, so you couldn't do any forensics on the projectiles that came out of that gun. And that was actually pretty intelligent because he knew that he would never be able to be linked to these guns that he would use.
21 days after the second attack, the Zodiac continued in Queens and focused on a Taurus. The third attack, on May 31st, 1990, made him a murderer. The Zodiac shot and killed a 78-year-old retiree.
There was a letter that was found with his body, and it had the sign of the Zodiac on it. It was like crosshairs in a circle, number 7s, and talking about the 3 people that had been shot and what their Zodiac sign was. At that point, the city developed a task force. There were dozens and dozens of detectives assigned to try to find him. I think they thought that every 21 days he was going to come out. From what I remember, they flooded the streets in that neighborhood to see if in 21 days he would appear. He did not, but decided to go into Central Park, where he shot a man named Larry Parham on a bench in Central Park.
There was one surprising potential witness: John F. Kennedy Jr.
He happened to be in Central Park around the time of Larry Parham's, the shooting of him, and he was riding his bike in the park, and he was questioned about what he saw. I just remember that. I thought, oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
Wow. JFK Jr. involvement in the New York Zodiac case. Did not have that on my bingo card in this interview.
Yeah. So he didn't add anything. He didn't see anything, but it was just, I just thought, oh, wow. He was interviewed. So he was there in the park.
Such a quintessential 1990s New York story too. Of course, JFK Jr. is riding his bike in the park while a shooting is happening.
Crazy.
The task force led authorities to think creatively, according to Larry Milanese, who was one of the first detectives on the case.
What happened was 3 of us were assigned to investigate outside the box, so to speak. We were doing the occult angles. We met with astronomers, astrologists, and actually had a meeting with a warlock who put us into Aleister Crowley, the works of Aleister Crowley. It was the book of Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley was an English author and occult figure. He was sometimes called the wickedest man in the world.
Whoever was doing the shootings was following the works of Aleister Crowley, called The Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley, he told us to get. We eventually found the book at the Central Research Library, which was a strange situation to begin with. When you go in, you have to go into a private area. It's a very large room, and you make a request for the book you want. They get it from their behind-the-scenes things. I went and got the book. The only copy that was in existence was this one that we knew of. I opened the cover of the book, and the book opened to the page I wanted. In that page was a note. I believe it said, "White Devil, we knew you were coming." And it had a pentagram and a lightning bolt on it. In that book, it laid out basically this whole thing with the shootings, why they were being shot. They were taking a slave for the afterlife. It said about striking down the wretched, strike low, strike hard. Everyone was shot below the lower back. Nobody was shot above their shoulders or above the chest, basically. Everybody was shot lower and lower back. My reaction was, first thing I did, I loosened my gun up and I looked around to see who the hell is here looking at us, you know? I mean, if this is the only book in existence and the spine on it was broken so it would open to that page, so we weren't going to miss what was to be said there, I felt somebody was there, but apparently there wasn't.
For Milanese, this was one of his final cases before he retired, and was one that was out of this world.
What happened was, all the notes had indicated it was Orion hunting Taurus in front of the Seven Sisters. We found that they were all constellations. We found that they were all visible at the time of the shooting. Stars are in the sky 24 hours a day. They're only visible certain hours. Every one of the shootings took place on a 21-day pattern when those stars were in alignment. They were all in the sky at that time. We met with the head astronomer for New York at the planetarium, Haven Planetarium, and they have a fantastic computer there. They were able to show when any stars were visible at any time in history or any time in the future. Now, when you take that and you put it together with the works of Crowley based on the number 21, it fell in that they were on 21-day patterns. When a 21-day pattern was missed, those stars were never visible at the same time. So on that 21-day pattern, they didn't shoot. So what we did was we worked out when the next shooting would take place. And we went to Chief Borelli and explained to him what our findings were and when the next shooting we felt would take place within a 4-hour period. Well, we were in the office and a call came in from Central Park that they had a body in Central Park that they found. The person was shot and a note was left with a stone on the body. And he didn't die. They told us, get over there right away. And we went upstairs to the detective squad, and Borelli was in the back with all his chiefs. And it was a good feeling because we walked in, here's our boys now, and he calls us over. He tells us, you guys were right. You were right on the money. This is when the shooting took place. Exactly when you said it was going to take place, it happened.
Even the most seasoned detectives like Milanese were freaked out by the events happening with the New York Zodiac.
I had worked on homicides, primarily organized crime things. I never was scared like I was with this case.
Really? So you were more afraid of the occult than you were the mafia?
Absolutely.
Following the fourth shooting, the New York Zodiac went quiet.
I think he got very nervous. He sent a letter to the Post and maybe to 60 Minutes. They couldn't find him. He sort of went underground for the next couple of years. He said there were 5 other people. He sent a letter saying all the people that he had either shot or killed. And so all in all, That was between 90 and 93. And then nothing happened. There was a second Zodiac task force that was put together. And the city was pretty nervous because, here they knew they had a serial killer. He claimed to be the Zodiac from San Francisco. That was a serial killer from the 60s and 70s that had never been arrested, who had killed dozens and dozens of people.
So it was pretty obvious early on that it was most likely, Eddie said it was not going to be the San Francisco Zodiac. I think early on he wanted people to believe that because he was a huge admirer of the San Francisco Zodiac. But he started his crime spree in 1990. The last confirmed notice we got from the San Francisco Zodiac was the 1974, what we call the Exorcist letter, was the last confirmed correspondence from the San Francisco Zodiac. And so there was a good, 16-year time spread from that. We're talking about New York City all the way from San Francisco, so 2,000 miles away. They sent some of the writings to some of the authorities in San Francisco that were still following the Zodiac killer case, and they quickly confirmed this writing doesn't match up. The language is a little bit different than what we knew the Zodiac killer used. So it was known early on that we were not dealing with the same person. What made him different was that the San Francisco Zodiac was attacking couples on lovers' lanes. The first 3 attacks of the Zodiac in San Francisco were couples, of course.
In contrast, the New York Zodiac attacked individuals.
He was basically looking for weak targets. One was a very elderly gentleman that shot in the back. Another was basically a homeless female. He was looking for targets that he was pretty sure could not fight back. He was pretty much a coward. He wasn't definitely going after people that looked pretty weak. The San Francisco Zodiac probably had a lot more planning in who he was targeting and why. I don't think either of these killers knew the victims, though. I think that's something that they did have in common, and they had their own methodology.
Then, in summer of 1996, police were called to the Brooklyn home of a man named Heriberto Seda.
It was on Pitkin Avenue, which is where Heriberto Seda lived. He had gotten into a fight with his sister, Gladys Reyes, who was also known as Chachi. She had a friend over, Wilbert Rios, and he didn't like that. They started fighting. And so he ended up shooting his sister in the back, and she somehow was able to escape into the hallway. And Wilbert Rios was barricaded in the room next door. And there was someone that called the police. The police arrived, and paramedics arrived to try to help her. He started shooting. He had all these homemade weapons in his apartment, and he started shooting at the police and the paramedics. There was a hostage negotiator that came in, and as it turned out, he was one of the detectives who worked on the Zodiac task force. His name was Joe Herbert.
Police got Seda to surrender.
He surrendered to us 13 handguns. However, there are a number of pipe bombs in the apartment building. We can't get you any closer to that apartment.
They would have buckets that would come down, and he would load his weapons into the buckets. They found pipe bombs in the apartment. He was brought into the 75th precinct, and he was spoken to by one of the detectives there. And what's interesting is he was given a piece of paper and told to write down what happened that day. And at the end of his statement, he wrote a circle with a crosshair. The detective thought that looked like it might be something that the Zodiac would have written. So he showed it to Joe Herbert, and Joe Herbert was very familiar with all the writings that had been sent, the notes to the 75th precinct, the notes to the Post and 60 Minutes, and the notes at the body of Larry Parham, and also from Joseph Procci. And he thought, this is the Zodiac. So what they did is they fingerprinted him. The letter in the Central Park case that was found by the body of Larry Parham, they were able to get a print off of that. And those two letters, the fingerprints they retrieved from both of those matched each other. So they knew it was from the same person. Years went by, and they were always trying to match those fingerprints with the fingerprint from whoever was arrested. Then they went back and spoke to him, and they got his confession.
Wow.
So it was really exciting. I always said it was sort of like Cinderella. It was like the shoe finally fit after all these attempts to try to find him. But there was a missed opportunity. He was arrested in '94 for having a zip gun. So he thought that was it. I mean, that was according to his statement. The zip gun was sent to the lab, and the detective there, I guess, was afraid to try to see if it was operable because it was a homemade gun and he didn't really know how to use it. They found it was inoperable and the case was dismissed. But later on, they kept the gun, and it turned out that that was the same gun that was used to shoot different victims of the Zodiac.
Once he was identified in custody, the New York Zodiac suddenly wasn't so terrifying.
Eddie was just basically a loser. He got kicked out of school for carrying a gun to school when he was 16 years old. He wanted to be a Green Beret. He joined the Army, and unfortunately did not get past their psychological test to get into the Army, or who knows what it came. Because if he didn't get in the Army, I'm sure he would have actually been able to acquire real weapons later on.
For you, like, was Seda just like an amalgamation of like classic 20th century serial killers and didn't really have that great of an imagination? Or was this that, he really thought that he could be a copycat and get away with it?
I think it's a little of both. I think he liked hearing about the Zodiac, and he had this vision of the astrology, because he's thinking of the Zodiac signs, even though the San Francisco Zodiac killer, we don't think it was really heavy into astrology. He may have been into more things like celestial navigation and maybe trying to time his killings up with the solstices.
In June 1998, Seda was convicted after a 6-week trial at the State Supreme Court for the County of Queens in New York. Seda was also convicted in Brooklyn a year later. The trial in Brooklyn was marked by Seda's bizarre courtroom behavior.
He decided he would come to court whenever he felt like it, and so there were days sometimes he didn't show up. So we would just be trying the case without him sitting there. As he was walking out of the courtroom after the day's proceedings, he walked by the judge, and the next thing you knew, he started running up the steps towards the judge on the bench. Yeah. And we were all like, oh my God. And the court officers just tackled him and brought him down. I remember Judge Tomei was he didn't even flinch. I mean, he didn't touch him, but he was about to. I mean, he was like right, on his side. And we all they got him and they took him in the back. And I don't know, Judge Tomei sort of made a joke about it, and we all started laughing. It was ridiculous.
Wow. But it also kind of shows like he could turn on a dime just like that out of nowhere.
Yeah, he obviously had some deep-rooted anger in him.
I think he was just looking for an excuse to attack anybody under his own mindset, and it was about creating a name for himself, even though he wasn't even original enough to come up with his own name. He's borrowing, of course, the one from the San Francisco Zodiac killer, so he wasn't even original there.
Ananiah looks back on the case with gratitude for the people who worked it.
It's funny because there were a lot of characters in this case. The detectives were fantastic, and they're the real heroes here. I think that it's a testament to the city of New York, the NYPD, and so the men and women that work for them. What a great job they did in solving this case.
Seda was sentenced to 232 years in prison. He currently resides at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, the same facility that houses Son of Sam David Berkowitz and serial killer Joel Rifkin.